"Here, Mark," said my pretty wife Julie, offering me a glass of red wine. "Please sit down. There's a matter we need to talk about." "Why the wine?" I asked, a little puzzled. "Bit early for drinking, isn't it?" "Take it," she said, handing it to me. "You might need it." Didn't sound too promising, but I took the wine, had a sip, sat down and looked at my wife, waiting for her to start. Looking at her, by the way, is not at all unpleasant. A 5'4" brunette of 29 summers, a little more than a third of them as my partner, and a little less so as my wife. "What's up?" I inquired, as she remained sat there silently, the other side of the table, more than an indication of a frown on her face, her brown eyes, usually so large and sparkling, somehow not seeming so at that moment. "It's difficult, Mark. I'm not sure how to begin," Julie sighed. "At the beginning," I suggested, wondering what bad news I was about to get, hoping that it was that she'd bent the car or something rather than something like a serious health problem. "I'm not sure when it began," she sighed, even deeper this time, giving me no further clues other than it probably wasn't that the car was bent. "You're not ill or something, are you, honey?" I tried to encourage her. "If it's that, then I'm sure we can get it fixed." "I'm not ill," Julie mumbled simply. "Good," I replied, it being my turn to sigh, this time with relief. "Not exactly ill, Mark," she confused me. "More sort of, well, it's difficult." I sat there keeping my counsel, waiting for her to continue. "You've noticed that I've been a bit off lately?" "Not really, Julie." "Well, I have, Mark. I'm surprised you haven't noticed. Surprised you haven't said something. You've been a bit snappy, I suppose, but I put it down to the time of the month or something," I admitted. "It's been a lot longer than a month, Mark." She shot back at me sharply, showing irritation rather than anger. "I've been on edge for months." "Sorry, sweetheart, I never noticed." "Not your fault, Mark," my wife replied, the irritation gone and replaced by a look of sympathy. "None of this is your fault. You've done nothing wrong." "So what is wrong, Julie?" "It's me, honey," she whispered, hardly audibly. "I think the best thing would be if we separate for a while. I've never been much of a fighting man, and have never been punched hard in the stomach, but at that moment I knew exactly how it would feel. I sat there staring at her, probably, I guess, with my mouth gaping wide open. "Nothing permanent, Mark," Julie rushed in to assure me. "Just a few months. 6 at the most." It didn't reassure me. "But why?" I croaked, my mouth suddenly and uncomfortably dry. "Because I don't think you'd like the other option, honey," Julie told me, staring at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's my problem, and I've got to solve it myself. The less it hurts you, the better." "And you don't think us separating won't hurt me?" I demanded, raising my voice for the first time, my sympathy changing to anger as I leapt to my feet. "I'm sorry, Mark," my wife sobbed, the first tears beginning to trickle down her cheeks. "I'm not doing this right. I just can't do this." Before I could respond, Julie leapt up, sending her chair flying and fled the room, her crying tormenting me as she rushed to our bedroom. Christ, what was that all about? I'd like to pretend that I did something sensible, that I took control in some way, but I didn't, and simply slumped back down into my chair again, sighing and holding my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the last 10 minutes. 10 minutes that even then I knew was going to change my life for the worse. It was a good hour later, and I was still sitting there in my misery, when I was suddenly aware that Julie was standing there alongside me. She hadn't spoken a word, and I hadn't heard her leaving our room or coming down the stairs. I waved for her to sit back down again, not trusting my voice, not sure that I could speak with any clarity. "I'm sorry, Mark," she murmured. "I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just..." "Just what?" I threw back at her when she fell silent, quietly but not trying to hide my anger and frustration. "Who is he? How long has it been going on?" "I swear to you there's nothing been going on, Mark. There is nobody else. You're the only one I love, honey. Can't you see why that's making it so difficult?" "I can't see anything, for God's sake, Julie," I screamed at her. "You're killing me. What the F all this about?" "It's me," she said, sighing deeply. "Obviously," I replied. "What's wrong with you?" "It's difficult," she repeated yet again, angering me further. "So help me, Julie. I'll bloody well you if you say that again, I shouted, really losing my rag. What's this all about? Tell me. Tell me now, or I'll throw you out of the damn house. Okay, Julie whimpered back, recoiling at my show of anger, something she'd never witnessed before. It's me. It's something inside me. Something eating away at me. Something that has been building up for a year or more now. Carry on, I spoke up, fighting to control my anger. I'm 30 next birthday, Mark. So am I reminded her. I know, but it's not the same for a man. You're better looking now than you ever were. Most men are, but for a woman it's all downhill from there. Cellulite, no more mini skirts or tight jeans. Leave a few buttons undone and nobody looks anymore. Rubbish. I reacted. She was talking rubbish and must have known it. At 29, Julie was even more gorgeous than she had been 5 years previously and still looked fabulous in her minis, even the super short ones that sometimes had me wondering how she had the nerve. And to suggest that nobody noticed her cleavage when she flashed it was like saying nobody noticed a bright red Ferrari accelerating by. I told her so, and she didn't argue, even smiling back nervously at me as I told her quite how attractive she was. How often I spotted guys looking at her in admiration. How my pals passed lusty comments about her, and especially her long, shapely legs, when they didn't think I was listening. How only that previous weekend, I'd watched with amusement as some old geezer had carefully maneuvered himself to the side of her to get a better view down the gap in the front of her top. How those 3 randy teenage boys had followed her around with their tongues hanging out when they'd spotted her wandering around on the beach topless when we'd been on holiday 3 months previously. I know, she admitted, smiling at me guiltily. I know I've still got it. I know men look at me and stare at me. I know men try to look up my skirt and down my top, and I know that some of your pals lust after me. I'm always having to ward off wandering hands whenever we are at a party, and I'm forever turning down guys trying to date me when I'm at work. So what's the problem, Julie? I asked plaintively, choosing to ignore the information, some of it quite new to me, about how often Julie was apparently the subject of attention beyond what I might have felt entirely comfortable with. I don't want to. What? I don't want to mark, she repeated. Sometimes I don't want to push off other men's wandering hands if I choose not to. To be free to accept a date when an attractive man chats me up. To be free to go back to his house at the end of it. Why now? What's changed? I asked, unhappily, shocked at what I was hearing. Nothing's changed, honey. It's just that I'm getting older. At the moment I feel that I could have any man I want, just by flashing a bit of leg at him or giving him the eye. But how long is that going to last, Mark? How many men are going to chase after me in another 5 years or so? She was talking rubbish again, of course, and Julie would be chased by men for ages yet. Christ, her mother was in her late 50s and still attracted men around her like flies. But I didn't contradict her, didn't say anything really, just sat there trying not to look over at her, not knowing what to say. I didn't want to lose her, but had the wind taken out of my sails by her wish to be free to date other guys. And yes, of course, to F them. If she was that determined, then maybe I didn't even want to bother trying to stop her. Maybe she wasn't worth it. But I knew that wasn't really how I felt, and knew that if I gave up without a fight, then I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So you want us to split up so you can F other men? Is that it? No, Mark, that's not it at all. She shot back at me, furiously. I don't want us to split up. I love you, and want to grow old with you. I just need a short break from our marriage to get this out of my system. To F other men, I repeated, dejectedly. No, Mark, she came straight back again, but a little calmer. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending that sometime, eventually, it might be that, and I won't pretend that the prospect of ending up in some strange man's bed isn't exciting. But it's not just that. Other than a couple of pathetic boys when I was at school, you're the only man I've dated, the only man I've known. This has got something to do with me taking your V, hasn't it? I asked, reflecting on how Julie had been a bit dowdy and totally inexperienced when I'd first met her, how we'd been thrown together as partners at a social night at the tennis club, and how surprised she'd been when I'd invited her out for a drink afterwards, though perhaps not much more surprised than I was that I'd asked. How captivated I'd found myself with a girl that I'd never taken any notice of for the previous year, and how I'd fallen under her spell so quickly. How nervous she'd been when I first kissed her, and even more so when I'd first felt her. How Julie had genuinely trembled, not knowing whether to grin or cry when I'd first undressed her. The first time we'd gone the whole way. How she'd laughed and cried at the same time afterwards, astonished at how wonderful it had been, eager to know how quickly we could do it again. The first time I'd taken her shopping and her reluctance to even try on any short skirts at first, and her embarrassment as she'd walked down the high street in her first miniskirt and pair of high heels, when I eventually persuaded her to let me buy them for her. How different now. How different that shy little woman had been, compared to the confident, beautiful, sophisticated, sexy example of womanhood that I was now married to. Yes, of course it is. Julie answered my question. That's part of it. You've never been with another man since me, Julie? I inquired, pretty sure of the answer, but nervous that there may be someone in between that I'd not known about. Of course I haven't. Damn you, Mark. Julie snapped back, her eyes flashing angrily. You know I haven't. You're the only one. For God's sake, Mark, can't you understand that's what this is all about? Have you been even listening to me? Can't you see that I'm frightened of getting old and never knowing what it's like to be young, attractive, and fancy-free? I missed out when other girls of my age were playing the field. I've never been able to walk into a pub or a club and wonder what guys I'm going to meet up with, how far I'm going to let them go. Am I going to let take liberties with me? Let them take me outside. Let them take me back to their place. I've missed out and I've never done any of that stuff, and I want to experience it before I get too old or I'll go crazy. And that's my fault? Of course not, Mark. I never said it was. Her voice softened. If I thought it was, then maybe I'd have done it behind your back, and Lord knows, I've had enough opportunities. But I can't do that to you. It would kill me to cheat on you. I'd rather die. Silence. A long, very awkward silence while we both sat there wondering what the hell to say next. The silence broken only by long, deep sighs from the pair of us, not knowing how we were going to solve this problem that confronted us. Eventually, I made an attempt to get her to see how stupid and unreasonable her attitude was, while she went back over what she'd been trying to explain to me. Neither of us succeeded, and I think by then, that neither of us were really listening to what the other one was saying. Julie made some supper, which we eat in relative silence, all our attempts at conversation fading back into some kind of silent truce. We talked about putting our names down for the annual tournament at the tennis club that we both still played at, falling silent when the futility of it dawned, not knowing whether we'd still be a couple when the day came. We went to bed, together of course, and even cuddled up. Julie made some attempt to fondle me to see if there was any interest, but I took her hand and diverted it elsewhere. Not angrily, but it didn't seem appropriate, and she didn't try again. We fell asleep. At least I did eventually, knowing that the matter was by no means finished, but that it didn't look good. Knowing what Julie wanted and claimed she needed, but knowing that I wasn't going to give in. Impasse. The next morning was surprisingly ordinary. Ordinary except somewhat quieter than normal. We said the things that had to be said in order for our life to function, but little else. Julie seemed to be on the point of saying something to me, possibly something significant, but I waited in vain to hear it. Breakfast finished. She went her way and I went mine. I didn't worry that she was going to do anything silly that day, and in fact the thought never even occurred to me. It wasn't that day I was worried about, so much as the days, weeks, and months that were to follow. If she couldn't get this silly notion out of her pretty little head, then any separation wouldn't be for a few months, but would end up being permanent, something that I knew, but she wouldn't accept. The day's work over, I made my way back home, surprised to see Julie's car already there, since she normally arrived home at least half an hour after me. "Hi, Mark," Julie greeted me, as I walked into the kitchen where she had started dinner. At least she didn't offer me another glass of wine. What the hell had happened to that one last night, by the way? "I'm sorry, honey," she remarked, when I just nodded back to her, by no means my normal greeting. "Look, I'm sorry, Mark," she repeated when I did little to respond. "I couldn't work today, so I've come home early." "What? Nobody at work take your fancy today, Julie," I responded spitefully. "That's not fair, Mark," Julie said sadly. "I know what I'm doing to you isn't fair. I know I'm being AB and being unreasonable. But I'm begging you, Mark, if you don't help me, then our marriage is toast." "Maybe that's what I want," I spat back at her. It wasn't, but I wanted to lash out and hurt her, and I could never bring myself to do that physically. Julie dropped the knife she was cutting some vegetables up with and slumped over the kitchen worktop, bursting into tears. I'm AS for that, and what man isn't? I stood there watching as her sobs racked her body, telling myself that she deserved it. Maybe she did, but I'm not made of stone and I loved the woman. Stepping over to her, I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder, giving it a little squeeze and telling her that we'd work it out between us somehow. Will we, Mark? She asked, haltingly between her sobs. Will we work it out, Mark? Will you help me to work it out? I'll try, Julie, I answered back softly. I don't know how, honey, but I promise I'll try. Not much was achieved that evening, except significantly I persuaded her that we ought to go and see a marriage counselor. Not that I knew of one any more than she did. Julie hated the thought of the idea at first, but eventually relented, and I breathed a sigh of relief, as much as because it would mean a stay of execution as with any hope that it might help us. It turned out a waste of time, as the two that we did find were overbooked and couldn't fit us in for at least a month, not without a court order or a doctor's note, and we didn't have the first and had no inclination to arrange the second. Our life continued, pretty miserably mostly, though there were brighter moments, especially when we were around others, when our life seemed almost normal. Normal, that is, except the one local party we attended, when the whole thing virtually blew up in our faces. It was just 20 or so friends, mostly couples, and a few friends of friends that we didn't know. It started off ordinarily enough, with plenty of booze, tasty nibbles, a bit of casual dancing, and a lot of chatter between us. The guys discussing the football and the girls whatever women talk about when they're together. Perhaps it was wishing to find out what that was a couple of hours into the evening that made me lean against the door frame and listen to a group of them talking just inside. Maybe I picked the wrong moment. Have you seen that guy, Dave? Demanded one woman, whose squeaky voice could only be Mary Thomas, a 30-year-old who lives just down the road from us. Tom and Carol brought him along. What a hunk he is. He's Carol's cousin apparently, added another woman, whose voice I didn't recognize. He's gorgeous. I wouldn't mind trying out his package. Big feet, big hands. I wonder what else he's got big, giggled Helen, whose voice I recognized, being my best friend Alan's wife, and the group around her all joined in the laughter. I was just imagining what Alan would think about that comment when I heard another voice that I recognized even more certainly. He's big, okay, I heard her say. He pulled me up to dance as soon as Mark disappeared and pulled me in close, and I mean really close. That close? Laughed one of the others, who I no longer cared who she was. What did it feel like, Julie? Huge, my wife giggled back. The cheeky devil kept poking it into my tummy. I bet you didn't push him away though, did you? Got to take it where you can get it, Julie laughed. Besides, the way he was gripping my bottom, I couldn't have pulled away if I'd wanted. Oh, poor you, Helen teased her, and all 4 or 5 of them burst out laughing. Yes, poor you, Julie, I growled angrily, hanging precariously onto my temper, as I stepped out through the door to confront them. The women all looked up in surprise, and then burst out into laughter again, having no idea of the problems that Julie and I were having, and treating Julie's comments as girly banter, the sort of fairly harmless thing that happens all the time at parties like that. All the women except Julie, of course, who stood there stock still, losing all the color from her face, staring at me and wishing the floor would swallow her up. Oh, come on, Mark, Helen chastised me, noticing that I wasn't amused. Julie was just shooting the shit. You know she wouldn't do anything to upset you. Do I? I growled again. I'm not sure I do. The other women fell silent, shocked, looking back and forward at Julie and me, clueless as to why I was so upset. Helen opened her mouth to say something else, but closed it again, changing her mind. I'm getting tired, I snapped at Julie. I'm ready to go whenever you are, unless you want to chance your arm with Loverboy. Julie recoiled. Her friends gasped, and I turned tail and left them, cursing her silently for what she'd said, and myself for overreacting. I'd heard her say things like that before, and I'd heard half the other women do so as well for that matter, and had laughed it off. But that was then and this was now. The rules had changed. The dynamics weren't the same. Our relationship was damaged. Julie came running after me, pulling me into the empty corridor, and promptly apologized and told me off as well. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said, gripping me by the arms. But there was no need for that outburst. How the hell are we going to explain that away? "There was no need for you to let him stick his in you, Julie," I pointed out. "He did no such thing and you know it," she shot back angrily. "I can't damn well help it if he's got a hard-on when he danced with me. It happens to me all the time. And don't tell me that you've never done the same thing with some of the girls who are here tonight." "Maybe," I felt forced to admit, "but I don't grab their asses and rub it up against them." "Look, I exaggerated, Mark," she quietened down. "Okay, he tried to take a few liberties, but I warned him off. It was just girl talk, for God's sake. Why are you reacting this way?" "Why the hell do you think I'm reacting this way?" I asked, suddenly calm. My question all the more pointed as a result. "Oh, that's it? Just, oh. I think we'd better go home, Mark," Julie gave in with, suddenly sounding defeated. "This isn't working. Why don't you stay here, Julie?" I sniped at her. "You seem to be enjoying yourself." I was. "Maybe next time I'll come on my own and really enjoy myself," she snapped back, but made for the front door anyway, grabbing her coat as she went out, with me a few steps behind her. Well, that went well, didn't it? For the next several days, it was like walking on coals, hot ones. We maneuvered around one another, trying to be polite, or even better, having nothing to do with one another. It couldn't go on, and sooner or later I felt that it had to explode. As it happened, it was more like an implosion. "We can't go on like this, Mark," Julie told me calmly one morning. "It was you that started it," I pointed out. "Are you going to drop this stupid idea?" "If I did, if I promised to," she half sighed, resignedly. "Would you believe me?" "Why wouldn't I? Think about it, honey. If I'm late home from work, if I want to go out with the girls for the evening, if I'm dancing close with some guy at a party like the other evening, when I go off on one of my company seminars for a week, what would you be thinking? Would you really trust me now, Mark?" "Good question," I said, sighing deeply. "I don't know. It would be difficult, so maybe not. I no longer know if I can trust myself, Mark." "Nothing more to be said then." "Then our marriage is finished, isn't it, Mark?" "Sounds like it." Oddly enough, the future, or lack thereof, of our marriage safely out of the way, we managed to get on a bit better. Not well, you understand, but better. We talked, we laughed, and we even cuddled a few times. We still slept in the same bed. It seemed churlish not to do so, but I carefully kept to my side, and Julie returned the favor. We did wake up one morning with my arms around her and spooning up against her, but immediately upon waking pulled away, distancing ourselves. Trouble was, I didn't want to. Pull away, that is. She was so beautiful and I still loved her, and this was breaking my heart. I absolutely wouldn't stand for this separation deal she'd asked for, but I hated the thought of losing her. Then it happened. I got ambushed when I came home from work the next day. "Mark, one of the men at work has asked me out to dinner," Julie hit me with. "I'm not sure what to say to him." "Do you want to?" I asked, trying to cover my dejection. "Yes, Mark," she whispered. "Sort of, but I don't want to upset you." "Would it upset you if I went out on a date with one of the women in my office?" I gave as my answer. "How about that pretty colored girl that works in accounts?" I had no real, or at least imminent intentions of doing so, as good as the girl looked in the tight jeans that she frequently wore, and didn't even know for sure if Julie would remember Sarah from our last Christmas party. I'd set it to strike back at her more than anything, sort of tit for tat, and hoped for a reaction, but not quite the one I got. "What?" She screamed at me, her eyes bright with anger. "That S? What have you been up to behind my back, you cheating bastard?" She shut up, fell silent, reaching up and covering her mouth with her hand in surprise, while I stood there, shocked, my mouth open but unable to let the words I next intended to say escape into the charged atmosphere. What I meant was, Julie eventually broke the long, drawn-out silence, but then, having done so, couldn't finish the sentence. "What did you mean?" "Nothing," she sobbed. "I didn't mean anything." "Julie," I cried out, reaching up for her, but she pushed me away, crying openly, sobbing that she had to get out, that she needed some air, grabbing her coat and fleeing to the front door and outside onto the street. I didn't stop to think, didn't hesitate, and leapt up and ran after her. My woman was in pain, and I couldn't let her run off like that. I couldn't desert her. 30 feet down the road, I caught up with Julie, and without thinking about it, took her hand in mine. She made a token effort to shake me off, but when I hung on, I felt her give in, and a few moments later answer my gentle squeeze with one of her own. We walked, the two of us, hand in hand for a good half a mile, not saying a word to one another. Julie from time to time sneaking nervous glances up at me. "What are we going to do, Mark?" she asked at long last. "I love you and don't want to lose you, but what, honey?" "You know what, Mark? Some days it's all right and I think I've got over it, but other days something happens and I want to scream out in frustration. It's silly things like seeing some cute guy walking by, or one of the men at work stopping to ask me a question, or even one of my male clients ringing me up. You must hate me." "I could never hate you, Julie," I assured her. "You shocked me that first time you gave me your ultimatum, but I just don't seem to be able to stop loving you." "I didn't mean it as an ultimatum," Julie replied, and something clicked. For some reason, I remembered something she'd said that first evening. It was clutching at straws and pretty feeble ones at that, but maybe worth trying. "Julie," I started, trying to remember exactly what she'd said. "That first night, you said something about another option, one that I wouldn't like, but you never told me what it was." "You won't like it. Try me." Julie took several deep breaths before speaking. "That I could see other men, discreetly of course, and nobody we know would know about it. Not many. Maybe one would be enough." "But probably not," I interjected quietly when she hesitated. "No," she agreed, not able to meet my eye. "I wouldn't do it in your face. I wouldn't embarrass or humiliate you in any way. Nobody we know, of course, and it wouldn't be often. Just being free to go out on my own occasionally and letting some strange guy chat me up. I'd tell you all about it, or keep it my secret, as long as I had your approval, unspoken if that's what you wanted." Her voice got more animated as she spoke, encouraged no doubt by my continued silence and lack of objections, maybe hoping that her words were convincing me. But she was about to be disappointed. "I couldn't do that, Julie," I told her solemnly. "It's not me. I haven't got it in me to stand by and let my wife carry on like that." "I know," she agreed, her burgeoning excitement fading. "I did say you wouldn't go for it. Why the hell didn't you just go off and cheat on me and get it out of your system without me knowing, for God's sake, Julie? Why did you have to be so bloody honest?" "I couldn't, Mark. Not behind your back," Julie mumbled quietly. "I couldn't cheat on you." "You could try," I cried out in desperation, not really considering what I was saying. "I did try," she shocked me with. "That guy, Carol's cousin at that party. I can't even remember his name. I'm sorry, but I lied to you, Mark. He did rub his against my tummy, and I pushed right back. He did feel my bottom, and I didn't discourage him. He asked me to go out into the garden with him, and I was so hot for him that I agreed. I thought maybe I could do it and get away with it without you knowing. I thought maybe if I let him F me, then it would get it out of my system, or perhaps show me how stupid I was acting. Anyway, he led me round the side of their garage and shoved me up against the wall, then kissed me roughly and grabbed me and squeezed hard. I was hot, sweating, desperate for it, and it was everything that I've been dreaming of, so I begged him to do it. He reached down and what? I demanded, my fist gripped tightly together, the tightness in my chest suffocating me. "And I couldn't do it, Mark," Julie continued, suddenly almost matter-of-factly. "I just couldn't cheat on you behind your back," and told him to stop. He didn't, and when he tried to drag my skirt up, I slapped his face. He called me a B and started to pull my top down, so I kneed him between the legs, and he let go of me and staggered back. I ran off, and he called me up, but at least didn't follow me. "I'll kill the bastard," I growled. "No, you won't, Mark, and it wouldn't be fair." I led him on. Thought it might solve our problems in some way, but I was kidding myself, and it wouldn't have solved anything, just made things worse. I tidied myself up and went back inside, and damn it if the girls I joined up with didn't start talking about him. Like a fool, I said what I said, and you heard it. I was somehow proud of myself that I'd pushed him off, but then you were there shouting at me, and it didn't seem fair. That sounds stupid now, doesn't it? But I wasn't thinking straight. "Christ," I muttered, stunned by the tale she'd related. "So you see, Mark, I couldn't do it. Can't do it. I can't cheat on you any more than you could agree to me doing it. There's only one way despite the risks involved, the way I suggested. Even if it ends our marriage? I refuse to believe that. We'll find a way. We'll get back together again. And if we don't, we will, Mark. We have to. That about ended the conversation, with neither of us having anything further to contribute. My wife was going to go off for a while and F a bunch of guys and then come back and our marriage was going to be okay again. Ha, bloody ha. My wife was indeed delusional. Sighs all round, and we somehow took one another's hand again and walked slowly and silently back to outhouse. Our marriage was over, and all that was left was to pick over the remains. Nothing to be gained by getting upset about it. I'd argued, shouted, and screamed. Just about everything except hitting her, and that wasn't going to happen. Discreetly, I started packing a few things together ready to make the break. Not clothes, but tools and things, the sort of things that you don't need every day. I just assumed it would be me leaving and Julie was showing no sign of sorting out her things. But then, of course, she was still planning on coming back if it was her that left. Our house was rented and we both had our own cars, so it would only be a matter of sorting out the bank accounts, and that wouldn't exactly be terribly challenging. We never actually discussed it and never set the date, but Julie was due to go off on one of her week-long medical seminars that she helped to organize regularly. We both knew that the company she worked for was full of attractive young things, with nearly as many men as women, so the chances were that one of her team that week would get the ball rolling. If not, then some damn doctor might be the lucky bastard. The morning Julie left, I waved her off as she drove away, determined that I'd be packed and gone by the time she returned on the following Saturday. I couldn't help but notice the tear in her eye as she waved goodbye back to me, and I only managed to hold on till I got back inside. We both knew, but weren't admitting it. It was like a damn train wreck that you couldn't stop happening. The train was running wild down the hill, gathering speed. Brakes failed, and nothing to prevent the catastrophic event that was about to happen. I was in turmoil the first few days, almost convincing myself that I should go along with her suggestion, but knowing deep down that I was kidding myself. It was over. Every day I wondered what guy my wife was flirting with, and every night, who she might be sleeping with. Not healthy, and by the Thursday, I hadn't exactly progressed my packing, promising I would start seriously that evening when I got home from work, and reprimanding myself because I hadn't done anything about finding somewhere else to stay. I was so miserable when I parked my car that evening that I almost didn't notice Julie's car parked in front of our house. What the hell was that doing there? I didn't reach the front door before it flew open and Julie burst out, rushing out to greet me and crying out my name as she threw her arms round me. I met this man, she told me excitedly, not exactly the news I wanted to hear. He was wonderful. Ignoring my protests, she carried on enthusiastically. I met him the first night, Mark. He's a doctor, older than us, about 50 or so. I had dinner with him, and he solved all our problems, honey. Sorry, Julie, I retorted, pushing her away and trying to keep my anger in check. I warned you. This isn't going to work. Of course it will work, Mark. Can't you see? All I can see is that my wife has gone off and slept with some stranger and now thinks everything will be okay. Life ain't that easy. What are you talking about? Jenny asked, calming down and staring up at me in puzzlement. You and other men, I snapped. You cheating on our marriage. Oh, that. Yes, damn it, that. But that was before, honey, she said, a look of pleading in her eye, and this time it was my turn to look puzzled. So who was this guy that you F? What guy? I did no such thing. Bloody hell, this was getting confusing. This man, this bloody wonderful doctor, that's who I mean. He was great, wonderful. I spent every evening talking to him. Talking? Well, that sounded odd. Yes, he was a psychologist, happily married with 3 lovely children. So? I queried, still not seeing it. What's his kids got to do with anything? But don't you see, my wonderful husband? She asked, and of course I didn't. It's my age, my hormones. My body was trying to tell me something, but I got the wrong message. What bloody message? I want to have a baby, honey. I don't need other men. I need a baby. But I thought you said... I know what I said when we talked about it before, Julie interrupted me, boiling over with joy. But blow my career, Mark. I want to have a baby. I want your baby. So all that? Rubbish! She interrupted me again, grinning wildly, still desperately clinging onto me like a drowning woman. My doctor friend explained the whole thing. Apparently he wrote a thesis on the subject and is an expert. Forget dating other men. Who needs them? I want a baby, honey. I want to get pregnant. I've come back early once I knew. Please help me. Well, not saying that I took it all in at first really, or that I didn't harbor certain doubts for a while when I did. Julie Dooley gave me a short note from her doctor friend written out on some very impressive-looking paper. Explained in plain English that even I could understand that women, some of them, go through changes at certain times of their lives, and that one of the crucial times is as they approach the latter stages of their life when they are still capable of bearing children. It's apparently as common in existing mothers as it is in women that have never had children, except that the former have a pretty good idea what it is, and the latter can often end up upset and confused. The good doctor, rightly or wrongly, put down many marriage breakups to this problem, and had been delighted to sit down and talk through the whole thing with Julie when she confessed her feelings to him. Not saying that I understood the whole thing, but I was half convinced, and when Julie rang him the second night back and got me to talk to him, then I found him pretty convincing. It was a silly thing that prodded me over the edge in the end. Him joking about how much it would have cost us if we'd gone to his office for a consultation, but that knowing that he'd saved the marriage of such a beautiful woman as Julie was reward enough. Couldn't really argue with that, and in truth, even if I could, then I simply didn't want to. If there was a genuine chance that this would work, then I was up for giving it a serious try. What about your job, Julie? I asked, still trying to come to terms with the new situation I found myself in. What job? She grinned back. I've already given my notice in. I thought 6 months might be about right. Give them time to choose someone for me to train up, and enough time for you to get the job done. Better get started then. I chuckled back, and taking her hand, led her up to our bedroom. She wasn't far out, and 6 months later found us satisfactorily 4 months pregnant, which wasn't bad, considering she had to let the effects of the birth pill wear off. In actual fact, she went part-time for another 3 months, more I think because she wanted to show off her new lump to her colleagues than anything else. Some women have bad pregnancies and some good, but Julie was resplendent. Her skin, her complexion, and her hair shone with good health, and she smiled and laughed so much that I had a job to keep up with her. Our friend Helen did ask Julie, seeing how deliriously happy we were, what the outburst at the party had been about, and she spun her some yarn about us getting frustrated because we'd been trying for a baby without success. But that now, evidently, everything was just fine and dandy. We never heard it mentioned again, and that guy, what was his name? Carol's cousin. Well, he went back to Dubai and we never saw him again. Just as well really, because he was a lot bigger than me, and apparently had been in the parachute regiment. Little Harry, named after Julie's dad, was born perfect, and I found my nose pushed out a little for a while by the 2 delighted grandmothers who couldn't get over their excitement. Not saying they ever did, but things did get back some kind of normality, and we were just beginning to enjoy it when Julie fell pregnant again. Helen passed a comment about waiting for a bus, and when it comes there's 4 of them, and we laughed, glancing at one another wondering what she'd think if she only knew. Glenda, after my mum this time, arrived on time and every bit as beautiful as her older sibling, and there's not a lot else to tell you. Oh yes, Julie took to motherhood like a duck to water, and our problems, or hers really, never resurfaced. Was the good doctor correct in his diagnosis? Or was it simply a case of another attractive supplanting a less acceptable one? Or even, was that what the doctor had in mind anyway? I've no idea, and it's all way above my head. All I know is that it worked and we're happy. She still wears short skirts and has the best set of legs at the nursery that the kids attend, as the half-concealed glances of the other envious dads give her would confirm. We still go to parties and things, though not so often now that we have the dreaded babysitter constraint. And yes, Julie still gets asked to dance a lot, and yes, a number of her partners try to see what they can get away with. And yes, if you're wondering, she knows her limits and sticks strictly to them, and they are well within my limits of acceptability as well. Julie's company kept her post available, but she never went back, and with the kids due to start school fairly soon, she made a momentous decision. I want to do an open university degree course, she told me with one of her loving smiles. You've got a degree, Julie, I pointed out. Not one that will allow me to work as a marriage counselor, she explained. Sounds good to me, I agreed, and that's what she's doing now. Intending to start part-time when the kids are both settled down in their new school. I think she'll be good at it. Did she ever cheat on me? I honestly don't think so, not really, and I know her better than anyone. Will she ever cheat on me? I very much doubt it. Simply can't imagine it, and the torment we both went through reinforces that. Do I regret anything? No. No point. Not even that I had to bring a sharp halt to the flirting I'd started with young Sarah, the little colored beauty, when Julie came to her senses. I like happy endings, and those of you, as there inevitably will be, who will rant and rave about not trusting the bee and to throw her to the wolves, know nothing. It's my story, so there. They lived happily ever afterwards, and their children grew up to be rich and famous. And by the way, what was his name? Oh yes, Dave. Well, he fell under a bus. A big red double-decker.